She loves you today, hates you tomorrow. 5 signs you're trapped in a borderline plus narcissist game. Imagine being in a relationship where one day you're her savior, her soulmate, her safe place, the only person who truly understands her, and the next day, you've somehow become her enemy, the betrayer who has destroyed everything good in her life. The emotional pendulum swings so violently that you start doubting not just her perception but your own. My client once lived in that exact storm, and perhaps, in some way, you have too. Today, I'll help you recognize 5 psychological signs that a woman may be living with both borderline and narcissistic personality traits, or, at the very least, strong patterns that mirror them. If you've ever felt like you're in love with 2 completely different people sharing one body, you're not imagining things. Let's unpack why that happens, and how you can regain balance and peace of mind. 1. Conversations that become psychological traps. When borderline traits are present, every discussion becomes emotionally charged. The questions are relentless. Do you still love me? Are you going to leave me? Am I safe with you? You might believe you're soothing her fears, but in reality, her past trauma is reawakening. These moments are not truly about you. They're about her inner child reliving the terror of abandonment. No amount of reassurance can fill that bottomless fear, which is why the cycle of questioning never seems to end. When narcissistic traits dominate, the conversation shifts from emotion to image and control. You'll notice questions like, do I still look good to you? Do people respect me? Who do you think I am compared to others? These are not genuine inquiries about connection. They're tests of admiration, ways to measure whether you're still maintaining her ego and protecting her fragile self-image. When both traits collide, you become trapped in an emotional maze. One moment she's pleading for reassurance, the next she's demanding validation for her superiority. The rules keep changing, and no matter what you say, too much or too little, you always fail. It's psychological exhaustion disguised as love. When communication becomes circular and emotionally charged, don't argue or over-explain. Instead, pause and name the pattern. I can feel this conversation getting intense. Let's take a moment to breathe. Create structured emotional boundaries. Decide what topics are open for discussion and which will only lead to chaos. Encourage her to seek therapy for emotional regulation, especially dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, while you focus on assertive communication and grounding yourself in your own emotional truth. 2. Empathy that turns into a weapon. Women with strong borderline traits can display astonishing empathy, a deep emotional resonance that feels pure and genuine. She may cry for a hurt animal, comfort a stranger, or even apologize tenderly after realizing she's caused you pain. But that same empathy gets swallowed by emotional flooding. Her nervous system goes into overdrive, and her pain drowns out her compassion. She means to love gently, but her emotions often hijack her best intentions. In contrast, narcissistic empathy is transactional, used as a tool for influence rather than connection. It appears as kindness, but only when it protects her reputation or secures something she wants. When borderline and narcissistic patterns coexist, empathy becomes a psychological paradox. She reads you like a book, knows your fears, your insecurities, your soft spots, and mirrors your emotions so precisely that you feel seen in a way no one ever has. But the moment she feels threatened, those same insights turn into ammunition. Your private confessions are thrown back at you with surgical precision, leaving you emotionally disarmed and questioning why love suddenly feels like warfare. Never hand over emotional weapons disguised as vulnerability without boundaries. Share, but selectively. Emotional transparency doesn't mean total exposure. When she's dysregulated, step out of the verbal battlefield. Calmly say, I want to talk when we're both in a state to listen. This models emotional maturity and signals that empathy must go both ways. Long-term, therapy focused on emotional integration and empathy training can help her rebuild authentic compassion that isn't fueled by fear or control. 3. Jealousy that morphs into possession. Jealousy is one of the most telling emotional signatures of both disorders. With borderline traits, jealousy stems from a raw terror of abandonment. It's not just worry, it's panic that feels life-threatening. If you don't answer her texts fast enough, She may spiral into accusations, emotional outbursts, or impulsive behaviors like flirting with someone else just to test your loyalty. She doesn't want to hurt you. She's desperately trying to soothe the anxiety that's devouring her from within. With narcissism, jealousy isn't emotional panic, it's territorial rage. You are her possession, her mirror, her proof of superiority. When your attention shifts elsewhere, to a friend, a coworker, or even a hobby, she interprets it as an assault on her control. Her response is rarely explosive. It's cold and punishing. She withholds affection, shames you, or manipulates you into compliance until you prove your loyalty again. When both exist in the same person, you face a double assault: emotional chaos from the borderline side and strategic control from the narcissistic side. One moment she's weeping, begging for proof of love, and the next she's policing your social circle, twisting every story, and making you feel guilty for simply existing outside her emotional orbit. You begin to feel like you live under constant surveillance, where love is conditional and every act of loyalty becomes a test you can't pass. Understand that jealousy is never about you. It's about her inner sense of insecurity and powerlessness. The healthiest response isn't endless reassurance but consistency and limits. Calmly reinforce your boundaries. I won't justify every action or friendship, but I am committed to being honest. Encourage couples therapy only if she's willing to take accountability. Otherwise, focus on individual therapy to rebuild your emotional autonomy and self-worth. Jealousy loses power when you refuse to play its game. 7. Entitlement. When boundaries become betrayal. In relationships with women who display borderline traits, entitlement often stems from emotional dependency rather than arrogance. She may feel instinctively owed your presence, your attention, and your steady reassurance. If you hesitate to reply to a message or fail to drop everything to soothe her anxiety, it doesn't register as a scheduling conflict, it registers as emotional abandonment. The reaction isn't about disrespect but survival. Her nervous system equates your momentary distance with rejection, reigniting the original trauma of being unseen or unloved. From a psychological standpoint, this form of entitlement can't be addressed with logic or lectures. What helps is consistent boundaries paired with empathy. When you calmly assert, "I care about you, but I can't respond right away," you model stability. Over time, this teaches her nervous system that distance doesn't mean danger. Therapy focusing on emotional regulation and attachment repair, such as dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, can also help her learn to self-soothe rather than demand external regulation. When narcissistic traits dominate, entitlement expands beyond emotions into ownership. She may feel entitled to your time, your money, your admiration, and your compliance, not out of fear, but out of belief in superiority. Saying no becomes an act of rebellion in her mind, a personal affront that demands retaliation. You'll often see this through manipulation, withdrawal of affection, or guilt induction. Her mindset is not "I'm scared you'll leave," but "how dare you disobey me?" The therapeutic solution here involves boundary reinforcement without emotional engagement. For those entangled with a narcissistic partner, detachment must be firm but calm. Reactivity fuels their sense of power. A psychologist would advise gray rock communication, minimal emotional responses that remove the reward of control, while also helping the individual rebuild self-trust and emotional independence that narcissistic conditioning often erodes. When both borderline and narcissistic traits coexist, the partner becomes the emotional regulator, the caretaker, the financial provider, and the ego stabilizer, all at once. You're expected to manage her moods, protect her image, and meet her needs before your own. When you finally assert a healthy boundary, it triggers a dual storm: the borderline panic that cries, "You don't care about me," and the narcissistic rage that hisses, "You'll pay for disrespecting me." It's emotional whiplash, vulnerability and vindictiveness colliding in the same moment. Psychologists often encourage clients caught in this dynamic to depersonalize the reaction. Her response is a mirror of her internal chaos, not proof of your wrongdoing. In therapy, individuals learn to hold boundaries with calm compassion, not to fix her, but to protect their psychological safety. Over time, this separation between responsibility and guilt becomes the foundation for healing and clarity. 8. Idealization and love bombing, the mirage of perfect love. When borderline traits dominate, idealization doesn't come from deceit, it comes from desperation. In her eyes, you become the person who can finally quiet the storm inside. She surrenders fully, declaring you her soulmate, the one who completes her. The connection feels otherworldly, almost sacred, because, in those moments, her fragmented sense of self merges with yours, giving her temporary peace from inner emptiness and fear. Yet the same intensity that makes the bond feel transcendent also makes it volatile. One small disappointment can flip the switch from devotion to devaluation, leaving you bewildered and emotionally drained. From a psychological lens, this isn't manipulation, it's emotional survival. The antidote is neither judgment nor over-explanation, but empathy balanced with firmness. A partner cannot heal trauma with affection alone. Therapy focused on emotion regulation, mindfulness, and self-identity building can help her stabilize. For those on the receiving end, grounding yourself in reality-based love, seeing the difference between compassion and caretaking, is essential to avoid being consumed by the roller coaster. In contrast, when narcissistic traits are dominant, what looks like passion is actually strategy. Love bombing becomes the tool of seduction. Poetic messages, lavish gifts, endless compliments, all meticulously designed to secure admiration, trust, and control. This isn't about intimacy, it's about influence. Once the emotional contract is signed, the warmth fades, replaced by entitlement and evaluation. Seduction, in this dynamic, is conquest. The goal is not to love, but to win. The psychological intervention here is clear. Recognize that the performance of affection is not proof of connection. Therapy can help victims of love bombing learn to trust actions over intensity, patterns over promises. For the narcissistic individual, treatment focuses on empathy development and reality testing, though such individuals rarely seek help unless faced with significant loss or confrontation. When borderline and narcissistic traits coexist, love becomes both sanctuary and battlefield. One moment, the intimacy feels divine, as if souls have fused, and the next, it turns hollow, mechanical, and manipulative. Each gesture that once felt romantic becomes part of a calculated performance meant to reel you back after punishment or distance. It's a dance between panic and pride, one partner terrified of losing love, the other terrified of losing control. Psychologically, this combination creates an emotional paradox for their partners. You're adored and attacked, uplifted and undone. The solution begins with radical clarity, understanding that love built on instability cannot heal what instability created. In therapy, survivors learn to rebuild a sense of self outside the cycle of chaos, practicing emotional detachment, boundary repair, and self-compassion as the path to liberation. When both disorders intertwine, the relationship becomes a war zone between vulnerability and domination. The borderline side clings out of terror, spiraling into emotional dysregulation, while the narcissistic side projects shame outward, protecting its fragile mask with cruelty. This inner conflict doesn't just exhaust you, it erodes your sense of identity and reality. From a psychologist's perspective, healing starts with separation and self-restoration. Breaking free from this emotional crossfire isn't about proving them wrong, it's about reclaiming your peace. Therapy helps survivors recognize trauma bonding, rebuild self-esteem, and understand that love and chaos are not the same thing. One of my clients, whose story mirrors many others, lived through this very storm. His partner cycled between worship and warfare, idealizing him, devaluing him, discarding him, and returning with tearful apologies and promises of change. Each cycle grew faster, sharper, more destructive, until anxiety consumed him. When he finally went no contact, her messages arrived like emotional aftershocks. "You're the only man I've ever deeply loved. I can only dream of what could have been." It was a perfect blend of guilt, fantasy, and emotional tethering, the illusion of hope wrapped in regret. He returned once more, believing his new understanding could save her. But knowledge without boundaries cannot cure dysfunction. The story ended as it always does, in heartbreak and exhaustion. If you recognize yourself in this story, the first step is not fixing her, it's healing you. Seek out a therapist familiar with Cluster B personality dynamics. Learn the language of detachment, rebuild your internal compass, and surround yourself with support systems that remind you of your worth outside the relationship. Freedom is not the absence of love, it's the presence of peace. And once you choose that peace, the cycle finally breaks, for good.